Prepare yourself for an awe-inspiring episode filled with time travel, personal character development, and the ultimate moral dilemma. Join me as I delve into the captivating world of Star Trek's Strange New Worlds and witness the entertaining story of La'an Noonien Singh and James T. Kirk. Brace yourselves for a mind-bending adventure that will leave you questioning the very fabric of time itself. Welcome, fellow Trekkers. My name is Will Polk, and I am host of CNN Presents Blerd Trek. Thank you so much for joining me today as I'm going to be breaking down the latest episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, episode 2-3, tomorrow. This is a spoiler-filled episode here, so if you haven't watched the episode, please drop now, go watch it, and then come back and watch this discussion. This episode was written by David Reed and directed by Amanda Rowe, who also directed the first season episode, The Elysian Kingdom, and is here to direct this episode this week. In this episode, tomorrow, we find La'an Noonien Singh and a alternate timeline version of James T. Kirk embarking on a very emotional, character-driven, and captivating journey through time to deal with one of the most thought-provoking questions of all. One, if you had an opportunity to take one of the greatest threats in your history out, would you do it? And then at a more deeper level, really this episode was a character study and into La'an as far as the repercussions of all the things we've learned about her in these first two seasons of being a descendant of an augment, also her own personal journey and why she is so reserved. But we also learn more about a alternate universe version of Captain Kirk and some of the things that he's been dealing with in his universe in this episode. So without further ado, let's dive right into this episode. But before I do that, please leave comments throughout my discussion here today. Would love to hear from you and have those from you. Definitely will answer every comment that I get on this video. And also be sure to hit the like button and also subscribe and hit that notification so that you never miss an episode of CNN Presents Blerd Trek or our main show that drops on this channel. So thank you so much for doing that. So turning to the episode itself and some of my thoughts as far as some of the main points that were explored in this episode. Let me just jump off right from the get. Yes, this episode is a familiar trope that we've seen in Star Trek, the utilization of time travel. It was it is a well-worn device that has been used in every iteration of Star Trek, whether it's live action or animation. But that was really a method that was being used to really be a catalyst for the deeper thing that was really going on in this episode, and that was really character exploration of both La'an and also James T. Kirk that we met in this episode as well. So yes, it does have all the familiar things as far as the predestination paradoxes. For example, we do that with Pelia and the archaeology department, and that was a fun scene at the very beginning of the episode of her having a treasure trove of artifacts and things that she's acquired over time, but then also how that loops back to a resolution point that was later in the episode where they visit her in Vermont, and we find her that she is not a engineer at the time, but she truly did work at the archaeology department. Another trope as far as predestination was the temporal agent at the beginning of the episode where saw the gentleman on the border there. He handed her the device so that she could go back in time, but in doing so, it and he said get to the bridge. And of course at that point, if you take it literally, he thought in her mind she was thinking get to the bridge, which she did at the bridge of the Enterprise. But then of course we later see in the episode it was actually the bridge there in Toronto. So yeah, those themes were there, but it really were all necessary to really hit the bigger point of really exploring who La'an is, and really picking up on a lot of the trauma, quite frankly, that she's carrying. And when when they had the start of the episode and the cutscenes from prior episodes of Strange New Worlds, we have very critical ones. For example, her confronting Una as far as being Una being an augment, and Leon's trauma when she was a child as far as just being called an augment monster, those kind of things. We had to cut back to last week's episode with her discussion with Nira and about who you come from, your lineage there doesn't make you who you are. But of course, La'an's been carrying that baggage or that trauma all through her life, as far as who her last what her last name is. And so this was a real exploration into that, using the time travel to get us open the door to really explore those things about La'an. And it was really a true character study, given that the show was such an ensemble show. And really, this episode really didn't have much from the rest of the cast. I mean, yes, we did have a quick fun moments there at the beginning with Spock and the noise complaint. We saw Denoblia then, as far as her day-to-day, mundane things of the job. I mean, with the Denoblian and the transporter chief talking about the ring that was getting stolen. It really reinforces a lot of the loneliness that La'an really feels as far as in her day job and her interactions with her crewmates, and really, but also that the one person that she did have a connection with Una, she's probably feeling very alienated from, because, as Dr. Mbinga noted during their sparring session, she didn't go to the party where they were celebrating her return to the Enterprise. So so there were a lot of things there, and also that scene also set up something that happened later in the episode, as far as her with the fighting and the sparring, where Mbinga used her force energies against her, and that came into play later in the episode when La'an was fighting Sarah. So the who we learn as a Romulan spy. So all those things are really just the time travel just sort of set up the bigger things that we were really get into the deeper exploration of La'an and her backstory, and it really serves as a catalyst for that character exploration. We get with James Kirk, we learn a lot of things about him as far as this version of Kirk, and we see that he's this version of Kirk, to me, I know a lot of fans had mixed emotions about Paul Wesley, especially with how he was debuted in the season finale last year, but I liked his portrayal, and I find that it's a blend of some of the traits that we saw in Chris Pine's interpretation of Captain Kirk in the Kelvin universe, but also William Shatner's James T. Kirk. And the thing is, with Wesley, he brought his own take on blending those different types of aspects of those respective Kirk's personalities. Especially, we got to see Shatner's Kirk go from the young captain of the Enterprise to a seasoned admiral to a seasoned captain. We saw his full span of life. So, whenever we get these alternate versions of him, you almost have to take Shatner's version of Kirk in snapshots of time, as far as, are you looking at it? Are you basing it off Kirk from the original series, Kirk from the movie franchise, or then later Kirk that we saw briefly in Star Trek Generations? So taking all those things in consideration, I like Wesley's interpretation, and I like the things that this Kirk in this timeline really had to deal with, because, and it was a great juxtaposition between him and La'an, because, after hearing the things that he has gone through, where his Earth, his Romulan Star Empire, he's familiar with them. They destroyed his Earth. Earth is shambles. When they first get to Toronto, he's like, is this New York City? Which is a nice little in-joke, because it seems like all the time Star Trek has gone to the past on Earth, it's either been in California, whether it's Los Angeles or San Francisco, or New York City. the city on the edge of forever. So it was nice to finally get out of the United States, quite frankly, and seeing another place, even though it was Toronto, convenient where obviously where the show was filmed. But it was nice to have that moment. But in bringing that up, he makes the point that in his world, he was born on a starship. He was born on the USS Iowa, and which was a nice little tip to uh, you know canon, in that they later established that our James Kirk that we know, at least in the primetime line, was born in Riverside, and they made that canon. But that was another nice little bit, and then also just how his approach to life and things. He's very, very, very. A lot of elements of like the Kirks that we've seen in the past, but also with this free spirit and the spirit of adventure and challenging things. For example, the hot dog stand. I mean, I could see either version of whether it's Kirk Shatner, Kirk Prime, or Kirk Wesley now, enjoying, well, let's go have a hot dog. The driving the car scene, that was very like a piece of the action, wherever reminiscent of that, and also young Kirk in the Kelvin timeline where he was, driving the stolen car. So all those little things really get into that, but then also his approach to the situations, like, La'an was very focused on the mission and trying to figure out what's going on when they had that hotel that overlooked looked over the Great Lakes, but at the same time the bridge, but at the same time he was Kirk was like really wanting to like crack open the bar and enjoy the niceness of the facility there. So I like those things about this version of Kirk. So again, we really get into the real deep exploration of the juxtapositions of those two types of characters, and that does lead to the romance that and the love story that developed in this episode. And it was a very believable to me. I mean, obviously the two actors had tremendous chemistry amongst themselves, between themselves, and all, and how they their interactions sort of grew throughout the episode. And because her being so rigid, him being a little less, he's very more carefree, a little less rigid. But when they're in the hotel, and she's like tossing there in bed, and starting to like, he's getting into that hard exterior of An, who, because of her, back again, her personal trauma is not only who she's ascended from, but also the tragedies that she's felt in her life with losing her family to the Gorn. All those things have made her to be a very guarded, very reserved person. Whereas James, his response to his tragedies and stuff, he just really, he responded to in a different way. So it was two like opposites attracting, and the chemistry and everything, and the little small moments of, I think back to the hot dog scene. I think back to Kirk Prime and Edith Keeler and City on the Edge of Forever, where they're, walking, through New York City and talking, and Kirk turns on the Kirk charm, and points out to notice how Edith really enjoys the stars and stuff, and Kirk points out one to her, and that was kind of like that in this episode too, where it's like the hot dog stand and things like that. They really just started breaking down the walls between them. So it was a very believable, even though it was like a fast romance, it was a very believable one, the way that the episode portrayed them. So that was another good hit in this episode. And so when we get those moments, and then we get the big character moment that we're faced with, and the questions that the two have to deal with, which is La'an, and her ancestry. Now, on Kirk Wesley version, continuity and Singh was not an entity, because at all for him. So when she brought that up, and of course you could feel you always see. I love Christina Chong pain when she talks about Khan. It's very on the surface, and the pain that she was walking around with, knowing that she's a descendant of this augment who was, responsible for millions and millions of death on Earth, and led to a third world war and all the things that come from it, which we'll get to in a bit. But for him, he was just like, well, it doesn't ring a bell, which gets which and also it was a very illustrative of the fact that genetic modifications in his universe aren't looked at the same way as they are in this version of Star Trek universe, in the Prime universe. So again, just really picking up on a lot of those little subtle point, but it's one of those points that really reinforces some of the things that were explored in last week's episode, and really helps to on really grow as a character and grow as coming to terms with who and what she is, and really leads to the climax of this episode, where they do go to the institute, and we get to the door, and of course we do get we get, well, first they got to get through the door, and the big fight there, and get back to the predestination paradox, and not only that, but also just more the butterfly effect, and things working out. We learn, like, early on, Sarah is Romulan. Now, of course, timeline wise, in the Prime universe, just to remember, On shouldn't have known what a Romulan looks like, because at least in our version of the Earth Romulan War, the they didn't see one another because subspace and communications are very limited. So there were a lot of rumors about what they look like and that kind of thing. Of course, Kirk Wesley did know, because in his universe they hit Earth, and he clearly recognized the bird of prey when they saw the ship. Whereas, so that's why he was able to put those things together. So I'll give them a little leeway on some of those continuity points there in the episode. But whenever they do have the ultimate fight between La'an, Sarah, and Wesley, it was very reminiscent of City on the Edge of Forever, because at the end of the day, when La'an gets to that institute, she has that moral choice, and City on the Edge of Forever, which is another time travel episode in the original series. Kirk knew that the choice that he had to make was, Edith Keeler was a good person, and because Edith was a good person, and in one version of events, if she had lived, it would have prevented the United States from entering World War II, and Adolf Hitler would have won the Second World War, and Earth's history would have changed that way. So Kirk had to basically let someone that he had fallen in love with die to basically fix things and make things right. Here, it's a bit more on the nose, where La'an knows that she's got to let the evil live in order for the good thing to happen, which is that Earth does have a devastating war and devastating results of that war, and they have to basically not kill Khan so that he could grow up. So, again, following, and in both situations, people had to make choices. Kirk's was a little bit different in that, just that he, wasn't someone that it's clearly someone he fell in love with, but it was something that it was just, it was more of an abstract thing. On is having to face the thing of, like, I'm from the seed of this entity, and I'm having to basically, like, confront all the trauma and all the baggage that I could carry. And yes, on the one hand, I could take him out, but then there's all the butterfly effects and ramifications of that. In that, if she takes him out, one, it'll probably destroy her universe. Two, it'll clearly destroy her, because who she's descended from. She is killing her direct lineal ancestor. So So you're dealing with all that. And then 3, she just lost Kirk, as far as who she's fallen in love with. So she's dealing with the trauma of that. And then 4, she's dealing with, fighting this Romulan here who is trying to mess with the timeline so that Romulus can get a foothold on Earth in this century. And then, of course, changing the flow of history. So there's multiple things going on in the choices that she's having to make. And ultimately, she decides that, even though it's the bad thing, you got to let the evil persist, because, it goes to the age old question. If you kill Hitler, could something worse come from it, from that? Or we've seen this in other things too, where, like, I think in Quantum Leap, they had to let JFK get assassinated. So, I mean, there's always those kind of things where, these questions that come up in these time travel stories. But here, this is a very personal one with La'an. And then when she does finally meet young Khan, she does say, she gives him the choice. She's like, maybe you should try something else. Maybe you should try, farming or gardening or something like that. It was what she had proposed to him. But it also helped her realize that at the end of the day, it was, and what Nero was telling her, who you are and who you come from, doesn't define you. And I think she, at that moment, realized that, like, oh yes, even though we had this innocent looking kid here, who, while it was a cute kid, and and all that, but at the same time, she realized that at the end of the day, my destiny is under my control, and yes, because of who I'm related to, did horrible things. I'm only responsible for myself and how I deal with those things. And so she had that epiphany there, and let him live, and then all was right with the timeline. And then we get, fast forwarded to the end of the episode, and all, and we do learn about the Department of Temporal Investigations, which is a nice nod to DS9. And all things are right, in at least now. At least time is how it should be. And so, so again, the time travel was a catalyst for the character exploration, and really thought they did a solid job of really diving deep into La'an's character. And so far, it seems that this season, that's what these episodes are really focusing on. All our characters in our ensemble cast. I know the first 2 episodes were really more an ensemble piece. Of course, Anson Mount wasn't there due to the birth of his kid, but this one was really more focused on Leon, and it was really good. Now, one little note: Amanda Rowe, who was on the 7th Rule podcast with Sirach Lofton and Ryan T. Husk, noted that for a moment they actually thought about using this episode as the kickoff episode for the season. But I'm glad actually it went this way in this order, because it really is a nice follow-up to one thing I even asked last week with last week's episode of, what's the ramifications and repercussions of La'an, and being, finally having to publicly out that she is indeed a descendant of Khan Noonien Singh. So I think this episode really got into some of those points with and I'm thinking again, when she does get back, and she gets back to her quarters, and she has that very, very human moment where she's just exhausted and just collapses, and she calls up Jim Kirk. She looks up Jim Kirk in this timeline, and we learn, she talks, earlier in the episode, we learn that, like, Prime Kirk Shatner, his George Samuel Kirk also died. Obviously, we know that Sam's still alive here, even though down the line we do lose Sam Kirk when Jim is finally captain of the Enterprise. Really used that moment when she, finally had finished that communications with him, and just all of it, the cathartic, like, of just just breaking down, and it was just like the tears, and hats off. It broke me, just just in a sense that got a lump in my throat, because we've all had those situations where something has just held you, that you just have dealt with, and just been just a huge emotional burden, and to finally be released of that, and we saw that catharsis of with on in this episode, I think was really what makes this episode stand out from just being a run-of-the-mill time travel episode, but really exploring the trauma that's been dealing with, and the baggage that she's been dealing with, and it all just rushing out there at the end. So excellent episode, well directed. I do want to, I did mention a lot of the timey-wimey things that did happen in that, and and I just looking on social media, a lot of the I don't want to say canon police, but a lot of people having issues about the eugenics wars getting moved around from the late 1990s to where is it now in the timeline. And the thing is, I think the showrunners here, and the show does address this, in that I think they do respect canonical points in time. So eugenics wars, it's a canonical point, but where it flows on the timeline, due to think about the events that we've had happen in Star Trek. Obviously the timeline's always been very fluid in this show, because even in the very beginning, where it was in the future was up for interpretation. It wasn't really, I believe, until Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, when you had a title card in the 23rd century, that we actually know that it is indeed in the 23rd century. And even when Space Seed aired with Khan, Kirk, so he's been sleeping for 2 centuries. But if that were the case, then it wouldn't line up with the 1990s. So there's always been these issues with time, but I do think where they did with this episode and talk about the ripple effects of time, and in other shows in Star Trek as well, with the Temporal Cold War, with the Borg incursion, First Contact, when Seth Cochrane flew his ship and with First Contact. And of course the Temporal Cold War that we saw in Enterprise, and Future Guy manipulating events. I think there are some of these fixed canonical events that happen in Star Trek, but because of outside manipulation and changes, they may get shifted from, like the for example, the eugenics wars. It may have gotten shifted from the 1990s to some point in the 21st century, and also World War III, eugenics wars. I mean, a lot, in the original series, those terms were tossed out there, but even when I was watching it before we even had these extended more properties, it always seemed like were they the same events, or were they distinct separate events? So I think what in the current universe and the current show runners are doing is, you have 50 years of continuity and canon that you're trying to reconcile. So you respect the canonical event, but you may have to adjust it along the timeline, and then you can use some of the other things from other properties or other series to justify those ripples and the changes in the timeline. So that's my take on it. Love to hear your thoughts on it. But at the end of the day, though, it gives the creative team, that's the end. Having that type of in-universe explanation gives the creative team the opportunity to be flexible when it's writing stories, especially in the show like Strange New Worlds, which is a prequel in the sense of the original series. So again, love to hear your thoughts on that. But really, really, really enjoyed this episode this week, and can't wait to watch episode 4 this week. So with that, let's turn to some quick news on Star Trek Prodigy. Good news this week for Star Trek Prodigy is that in the 39th Annual Television Critics Association Awards show coming up in August, the show was nominated for an Outstanding Achievement in Family Programming. And this is a category that was created in 2023, which recognizes shows created for youths of 7 years old and up. So, as of course we do know, Star Trek Prodigy really was part of the idea was for that show to really try to grow a new fandom with younger viewers, so that we can continue Star Trek on for another 50 years. But the other shows that are also in that category that were nominated were American Born Chinese, High School Musical, the series, Jane, Love, Victor, Marvel's Moon Girl, and Devil Dinosaur, Miss Marvel, Never Have I Ever, and the Mysterious Benedict Society. So those were the other shows that were nominated for this category. But we wish Prodigy all the great luck and well wishes on the nomination, and hopefully the show will be recognized. Looking at Memory Alpha, which is a great repository of Star Trek information. This is since the TCAs were launched in the 80s. This is the first time an active Star Trek show has been nominated in a category. Of course, the original series was in 2020 was awarded the Heritage Award from the TCAs, but this is welcome for the Star Trek Prodigy. Also, Prodigy has also been recognized with some Emmy nominations in the past for Outstanding Animated Series, and the series has won an Emmy for production design. So, again, I know for many of us it's very baffling, the cost savings measure that Paramount Plus had articulated for removing the show from the platform as they're onboarding the Showtime app onto the platform and all. But we're really hopeful that the showrunners do find a new home for Star Trek Prodigy. I know I saw on social media the showrunner Aaron Waltke and the Hageman were very hopeful that they are able to find a new home. They didn't really get into it much. Of course, a lot of NDAs and stuff go into play with negotiations a lot of times, but hopefully the show will be able to find a new home. And as soon as it does, be sure to follow us here. We'll definitely let you know where Star Trek Prodigy Season 2 will be airing. So with that, that's the if you haven't already, be sure to sign the Save Star Trek Prodigy petition. You can go to change.org. I'll be sure to drop a link below on this video for you to sign that petition if you haven't already. It does work. We just saw another show on Netflix where a fan petition was able to save a show that was canceled. So, and of course, we're sitting here still talking about Star Trek 50 plus years after an original fan petition saved this show. So we know the creatives and studios do listen to fans, and so go sign that petition so we can save Star Trek Prodigy and see a second season. Thank you for joining me on this latest episode of Cine Nerd Presents Blerd Trek. Be sure to follow us on all our social media channels so you can get the latest information about Star Trek and other things that we cover on our main show, Cine Nerd. So you can follow us on Twitter at Cine Nerd. Follow us on our Star Trek page at SNN Blerd Trek. Be sure to follow and like us on our Facebook page. You can follow us on Instagram at scene_n_nerd. And be sure to bookmark our website, www.cinenerdpodcast.com. Our main show drops every Friday, and this show drops typically on Saturdays or Sundays. So be sure to rate, follow, and comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Live long and prosper.